Did you softbox it? You know where it goes out and in? No. I know I think about the layers, right?
Is that you? Nice.
That's our internal dance clock. Right. Scientists know. Oh, hooray. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. All right, that was rehearsal. One more time. For reals. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Oh, this is a good group. Yes. Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful summer day. My name's Christy Bolingbroke. It feels very familiar, and the good news is that we'll have more time to chat in between these discussions. My title by day is the Founding Executive Artistic Director for the National Center for Choreography here in Akron, or NCCAkron. I am so excited to be here, and particularly grateful to David and Joan and the GroundWorks team for the invitation. Let's give them a round of applause. And this unique opportunity for us to be in space together, I have approached it as a living environmental analysis. Sometimes we're so busy doing the things. This is a moment to reflect. This is a moment to challenge and affirm what we think we know about making dance in Northeast Ohio and continuing to protect its legacy for the long term. I am also responsible for housekeeping, and so I'm going to turn to my script and make sure that I do take care of that. We do have restroom facilities just out the door past the elevators. There will be a break at our halfway point, and food will be available in the room next door. This is a museum with exhibition space and artwork in the galleries, so the food does need to stay in these two rooms. And I'll give you more instructions also at the time for our break, because we want to encourage you to mingle and make more new friends. We want to offer a special thank you to the team here at the Cummings Center for the History of Psychology at the University of Akron, their staff and students for opening their space to us and for taking time to be here today. The center houses the National Museum of Psychology, the first, only one in the nation, art galleries, the Archives of the History of American Psychology, and the Institute for Human Science and Culture. The museum and galleries will be open until 3 p.m. today, and I encourage you to explore those after our conversation. Excuse me, that's 5 p.m. today. Yeah, that would be helpful. Specific shout outs to Dr. Jody Kearns, the director of the Institute for Human Science and Culture, Dorothy Gruich, the business operations manager for the museum, Jonathan Endres, the media and technology specialist, and student volunteers, Melanie and Maggie. So the acknowledgement for the space we're in. You're right on time, welcome. Excellent. I wanted to share an anecdote briefly. The first grant panel I ever served on was for a $9,000 innovation grant. And in that panel, the pool included Anna Halprin. She was 90 at the time. And here a veritable pioneer in our dance field. And I was humbled. Who am I to say whether or not Anna Halprin is innovative? And also immediately felt the friction that Anna Halprin at 90 years old was competing for $9,000 in contributed income the same way a freshly minted MFA dance graduate was. And that gave me so much information about the reality of the field that we operate in too. So holding on to that today, that's what this feels such a special opportunity for all of us to be in this space together, to hear each other's stories. I said it before, to both affirm and challenge what we know about doing this work, And I also want to invite you, if you are like me, post-pandemic and a little bit of a introverted extrovert, and you're like, I don't want to talk to any people, please check out the timeline on the far wall. This is something in our excitement for today's session, and special shout out to co-researchers Laura Ellicott and Nikisha Moore-Dunson from the NCCAkron team. Oh, that's great. Just the facts, things that we could find veritable sources online, in legal documents, from personal anecdotes and emails about dance in Northeast Ohio dating back to 1915 and then up through today. And we would welcome and have extra Post-it notes if anyone would like to add to our history, because that is the other purpose for us to be here today, is to collect all of the working knowledge that we carry. That said, I'm gonna get this show on the road. I already have prepped all of our panelists that because we have such an abundant field and we wanna make sure to hear from everyone, I might be moving things along with time, but I know everyone's well rehearsed and has their own inner dance clock. We all rehearse differently, Bill. Yeah.
True.
Amazing. So, with that, our first score, we'd love to hear artistic highlights from each of our founder legacy panelists in the first half of today. And this was decided anyone who'd been doing this for 20 years or longer, if it gives you an idea, because you know, what is legacy? When many of us started dancing, you were done at 35, and now we're dancing well on into our golden years. And so I'm curious to start with you, Ms. McIntyre, on the end.
You'd better start with somebody else.
Okay, I take that note. I would love to start with Mia then.
Okay.
To hear you describe a significant artistic achievement or moment. This Mia is from Ballet Excel. Some people may be familiar with Ballet Excel, some people may not. Maybe it's been a minute. So this is by way of introduction.
Sure. Okay. Thanks so much for having me. I love being here amongst these wonderful people. My mother, Nan Klinger, started Ballet Excel, Cuyahoga Valley Youth Ballet back in 1975. We were the 4th youth ballet in the country. So that goes to show that we, you know, are very much a pioneer in youth ballet right here in Northeast Ohio. I changed it to Ballet Excel Ohio. Before my mother passed away, I said, do you mind if I change the name? Because when we would go to New York or anywhere else, no one could say Cuyahoga Valley Youth Ballet. So she promptly said, oh, I don't care what you do. You do whatever you want. It's a lot of work. So I felt like that was her way of saying, you know, go ahead. And probably my most, I don't know, it's kind of more a memorable moment, but also artistically a wonderful moment. My mother passed away on a Wednesday. And me being a first-time artistic director, by Friday, we had our family all home, you know, for the funeral. And my board president walked in the door at our house, and he said, okay, we're gonna get champagne out. And I was like, okay, this is my mom's funeral, but okay. So we got champagne out, and he opened up a letter, and it was from the Bemelman family, who wrote all the series of books for Madeline. And we were the first youth ballet, the first ballet company in the world to ever get rights to a Madeline ballet. And I knew that was my mother. She had great pull being up in heaven and giving me this opportunity. So after that, it was now the second time that our youth ballet ever had a pianist, William Wade, who of course Christy knows, and another choreographer, Francis Petrelli from New York. He has Dances Petrelli. they collaborated together and made a full-length ballet of Madeline. And that being my very first ballet, I just felt like I stumbled on it. Because, you know, as a new artistic director, you have, you know, great ideas, but you're trying to do everything. As we all know, artistic directors are pulled every way. And I'm just so happy that it still to this day is our highest income for a ballet, but that it was my first ballet and I felt like it was a gift from my mother.
Oh, wow. I mean, yes, I know. I love that choice. The prompts were purposely offered so that any of our speakers could think and consider, but how you choose to answer it. And I just want to name, like, choosing that moment, which really was also a leadership transition, and listening to the larger muses and angels and all of the forces that we can't see to also say, this is what you do going forward. Thank you. Mary.
Oh,
yes, a significant artistic highlight or achievement to introduce us to Dancing Wheels.
Sure. Well, Dancing Wheels is now in its 44th season. We're physically integrated, so we'll continue. I started when I was 5.
Prodigy.
Prodigy, right. And physically integrated with what we call stand-up and sit-down dancers. So it's a nice composition of dancers now, all abilities and ethnicities, genders, and such. So the couple of highlights that, if I can do two, I would say, one was so significant for us, which was the first OAC grant that I wrote and applied for. At that time, we were operating in a bedroom out of my house. So that's how fledgling we were. And we were doing a lot of lecture performances out in the community and assembly programs. But this was our first grant application. And I sat in the audience and there were so many misnomers and misunderstandings happening on the panel that they couldn't understand, or one had said, well, is this going to be a flash in the pan? Like, how many different ways could you dance in a wheelchair? And I sat there, I was biting biting everything, my tongue and everything. And the person that was the head of the panel had come to see us, and she stood up at the time before they were going to vote, and she gave testimony to what she saw and what she believed could be possible. And they voted unanimously to accept the grant. And so here was one person whose testimony and belief made a world of difference in the future of Dancing Wheels. And the second one was when we, I had met a choreographer, Keith Young, and he was doing the Drew Carey show, and I was trying to be an extra in the show. But we ended up meeting, and he had a big fervor for working with people with disabilities. His sister was deaf, and he wanted to make that commitment. So he came from Hollywood. He created a work for us. We flew out to back out to Hollywood to do the Christopher Reeve, A Celebration of Hope, national television show. And there were every star in the world that you could possibly think of were there to support Christopher Reeve. And at the end, I was petrified. I was exhilarated and petrified. We didn't know, but it was being sung by James Ingram, the song, and a full chorus and an orchestra. And we only had 2 rehearsals on stage that day, and it was a 5-camera shoot. And so we finished the piece, and the entire audience rose to their feet. Now, for me, that meant a significant thing, in that here was a whole room full of people who you thought would have seen everything in the world. Stars, you know, they've been everywhere. but they hadn't seen physically integrated dance, and it moved them to their feet. So that to me was an acknowledgement that the work we had to do had to continue on and grow.
And both moments, such beautiful representations of, like, you know, we can make dances up in our living rooms or bathrooms, wherever you have a better mirror. And yet it's not really complete until you have some sort of audience response and impact, whether that's one person or an entire auditorium. Excellent. Thank you. Ms. McIntyre?
Okay.
Only if you're ready. I'll follow your lead.
Yeah, the stories are very, very beautiful. Thank you both. So, I grew up here in Cleveland. I grew up in Cleveland, and I think we touch on that later about all of our background. And I really started my professional dance career having my own company in New York City. And then we've have toured around the world. I have a new company coming up now. I started that back in the 1970s. So I've over the years had a lot of connection here in Northeast Ohio with the different companies. Since I live in Cleveland again since 2003 when I came to support my parents, and I have continued to stay. So what I was thinking about this. I have had quite a number of like Mary, like the significant, memorable moments. But I'll tell you about this one. It wasn't a moment, it was a whole season. I was asked by a person, there was a person who knew me from New York. He asked about what type of new work I wanted to do. It was connecting dance and theater. So I said, oh, my father has a lot of stories growing up in Cleveland, Ohio. He said, oh. I said he knew Jesse Owens, the runner. He had friends who grew up to be mobsters. Who were his buddies. They used to play when they were little. And then he also loved to work. He had all kinds of work on the railroad and this and that. And the person I called him, one of my mentors, a producer, he said, I like that. He said, I like that. So I interviewed my father. I had always been interviewing my parents, both of them. Just not for any reason, not for production. Just, they're telling a story. I'm like, hold that thought, Ma, hold that thought. Then I run and get my little tape recorder. And so I had been doing that over the years. Then I started interviewing my father, particularly for production. So he told me stories when he grew up and everything. I said, now tell me about this. So I had all those on tape. And the work, the dance, theater work came out of his actual words. All the dancers, they were triple threats. Well, they tried to be. Some were stronger dancers, some were stronger actors, some were stronger singers. So they had to look like they did everything. So the cast of both male and female identified people have to be accurate. Okay, they all were my father's voice. They were all Benny. So this idea came to me originally because I was in a workshop. It was in the New York area. And in the workshop was about the races or people of differences, we'll call differences. What the things that you're most alike. In this workshop, a woman told me, she said, you know, I'm afraid of, it was a white woman. She said, you know, I'm afraid of black men. I'm like, really? I said, why? She said, aren't all black men violent? I'm like, and in my mind, I'm like, she's talking about my father, my cousins, my best friends. That gave me the idea of making the piece about my father. Okay, so we did the piece. We did it first. It was in several places, not in Cleveland at first. then somebody who knew where it was first done was a friend of a person at the Cleveland Playhouse. So we got to do it at the Cleveland Playhouse, and it was called, I Could Stop on a Dime and Get 10 Cents Change. That was one of my father's one of his favorite sayings. So I was just thrilled with how, and then the set designer made this big, the subtitle was A Ballroom Drama. I could stop on a dime and get 10 cents change, a ballroom drama. And so the set had a chandelier and these drapes like you're in a ballroom. And even though the dancer, actor, they wore the same ballroom clothes throughout, whether they're working on the railroad, whether they're driving this, whether in World War II, they wore the same ballroom outfits because that's who my father was, elegance. So at the end of, sometimes at the end of the show, which turned out, so it was the highest grossing production that year at the Cleveland Playhouse. So at the end of the production, some people, they would see my father or they'd see me and they'd say, wow, my father told the same stories. But they were Caucasian or another race. They're like, my father played those same games. My father did it. Well, it was like they saw in that they were all the same, that we're the same. That was a highlight of my life because that was my purpose, but the people that actually came out of their mouths. Wow, my father was in World War II, and he told me all those stories, da-da-da-da-da. We used to play those same games. I knew that guy who was a gangster. Yes, da-da-da-da. It was like, yes. So that, and then it made my father a star. He was interviewed for TV. He was da-da-da-da-da. And he says, why did you do this? He said, I didn't do anything. My father said, I didn't do anything special. I said, yes, Daddy. You are special. You are a hero because you are like most of the fathers, husbands in this country. You raised the family and you gave your everything. You sacrificed to make everything for the family. You are what we call a good citizen. I said that makes you a hero. Right. I said that's why we did this show. So that was one of my highlights of my dance life.
There's something, I mean, I don't think that we have to do much convincing to this crowd about the power of dance and what dance can do. But in your story, I am reminded of two things. One, my first time that I got to meet you when I moved here in 2016, the first 30 minutes that I sat down with Ms. McIntyre, she told me about every other artist's work in town. Oh, you have to see this person's work. You have to see this person's work. And hearing your own reflection is the image of the power of the people in our lives, both as inspiration and the connections to make those things happen as well. Thank you so much for living that and for sharing. Dr. Maggie Carlson?
I don't have anything nearly as moving and touching as what these people have just said. So I have two very short stories. One is very early on. The company's 37 years old, but very early on, when I became affiliated with the company, it was in the aftermath of Cleveland Ballet had folded. I had been a dancer with that company and affiliated with it for about 17 years, and then followed on the heels of Ohio Ballet folding, which I also had an affiliation with. And I had gone into a very deep depression because I was so, it was like having the wind knocked out of you to lose two great companies like that within a very short time span. And so we, and Kathy would remember this, Kathy Meredith, we decided to do the work Appalachian Spring by Martha Graham. And at the time, the whole Graham state was in a big state of flux. Who owns what, who does what? And so, you know, we were sort of jumping into that kind of a mess, if you will. And we ended up, you know, being able to do the ballet. And not only that, but the Graham Company, they loaned us the Noguchi sets. And I mean, you know, talk about being terrified to pick something up and move it. And the costumes. And so one of the costumes had what Rudolph Nureyev's name in it. One had, was it Martha, whose name was in your costume? Wasn't it Martha Graham's or? Anyway, they were the.
It was so old and I ripped it.
That's how, yeah, the costumes were so, they were the original costumes, and to sit there in that greatness, in amidst this enormous, very horrible change that had happened in our region, to do that, and you know, she called her works ballets, so to have been able to do that ballet, and when we first performed it, you know, we had a sellout crowd. You know, standing ovation from the audience, and it was that moment that gave me hope that the dance can have a future here. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't know where or what it's going to be, but there's a possibility of that. And oddly enough, driving down, I had on 90.3, and what did they play? Appalachian Spring. The entire drive down, I got to listen to the ballet. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah.
Anyway,
sure. There's something that you've reminded me of, a question that came up in preparing for today. Like, how does our history give us the foundation to dance a future? But also, when is our history, the weight of it, perhaps holding us back? And I don't think that that's a answerable question, but it's one I think constantly toggling that I want to share. Yes.
I just wanted to say that I had just come back to Cleveland. That was the first dance work I saw at Kane Park, Appalachian Spring. I said,
welcome home.
I said, okay, Cleveland. Oh, because that performance was phenomenal. I mean, because I had seen the Graham Company do it. I had seen them at, last time I'd seen was at Blossom with the Cleveland Orchestra. That was because I was visiting here or something, and and then I saw you afterwards, and you said, "Are you Dianne McIntyre?" I said, "Yes." Yes, it was breathtaking. It was breathtaking. Everybody was just on it, and I didn't know till now that you had the original costumes and the original set. I didn't know how you had duplicated that. Yes.
Well, and when we had to return them, we were going to APAP, and we rented a bus, and we had those sets in the aisle of the bus. And we went to some warehouse, and somebody was there, and we unloaded, you know, we unloaded everything at this warehouse, and then we kept on going to New York. I mean, it was, you know, you feel like, you know, this stuff is priceless, and, you know, what if you break it or you do anything terrible to it, so.
Yeah. David? What artistic highlight would you want to share from your time with GroundWorks Dance Theater?
You know, first of all, I just wanted to say how I'm just so overwhelmed being in the room that this is happening. I want to thank everybody for just wanting to be in this conversation together throughout the day, and what an honor it is for me to feel like, I don't know, I feel like there's this continuum. And I think throughout my career, I struggled with that. Like, it was not always evident to me, for whatever reason. It's interesting that you say, Christy, you know, both the past is both this amazing catalyst, but also sometimes might be a hindrance in people's minds. I think as an artist, I've always kind of had a friction with feeling like I needed to somehow live into some version of past greatness or past ideas I think that was an impetus for me to want to start GroundWorks. I'm sure there's a lot of artists in the room who, it's not that I wanted to ignore the past or the tradition, but I really, really felt that, you know, there was something that I was not experiencing. That I was really, really curious and eager to try to understand better and try to manifest through the company, through my work. When I started GroundWorks in 1998, both Cleveland Ballet and Ohio Ballet were in force. That they were the dance pillars, and you kind of you had to deal with that in you know, it was because the leaders of those organizations were incredible people, incredible artists, strong and so really finding some way for myself to say, well, why should I do this? You know, really, what is the sort of impetus? I needed to kind of not think about, at least for myself, you know, what was there already. I needed to just really take the leap of faith and say, you are going to find something. You're gonna make something that that maybe hasn't existed before. I wasn't entirely convinced, but I had to have that sense, I think. Starting the company was just an extraordinary leap of faith that way. I didn't know much about choreographic process, I would say, honestly. Most of the work, I've been exposed to a lot of different work, but it wasn't a process-oriented experience. It was more, you know, things being made on you or set on you. And that's kind of the background. I came from ballet. You know, my performance career was in ballet, so we know that that's not exactly a collaborative process all the time. So really trying to figure out, like, in addition to what we could do as an organization, like what I could do artistically that would be the motor behind what we were trying to do. And I, you know, initially, so I do remember, you know, just sitting in the studio and just really, my gosh, you know, this is like, okay, all right, here we go. I think significant artistic moment for me, maybe not so much as an individual artist, but as a leader, as an organizational leader, and I really came to understand there's different demands to both those things. But as an organizational leader, we hit on this idea. I mean, the company was trying to find ways that it could perform. Everybody knows. And we were doing whatever we could, wherever we could. And we hit on this idea that we would start to try to identify locations of architectural or historical significance. We called it our landmark series, but it gave us a kind of moniker or frame for thinking about non-traditional spaces.
I love that series, David.
It was so good.
Absolutely loved it.
Thank you. And actually, here in Akron, it was one of our, we fell into it. It turned out to be this amazing venue. It was the original ice house storage facility for the city.
It's down the street.
Yeah, and you know, just like I called it our you know, industrial cathedral, because it was 55-foot high ceilings, brick walls with spikes sticking out of them, and once a year we had to bring in everything: electricity, seating, staging, lighting, everything, soup to nuts. But we did it every year for about 12 years until the roof started caving in. And it was just a fantastic kind of foothold. And I felt at that time that really, you know, the organization, it helped the organization get a kind of traction and help us create an identity for the kind of work that we were interested in producing. Very, very interested not only in exploring new work, but new ways of presenting work at that time. And so, yeah.
Cool. And Bill, our last introduction for Inlet Dance Theater, what significant artistic achievement or moment would you like to lift up?
It's interesting hearing all these, right? And realizing, like, I remember that, you know, kind of thing. But, because I thought about this a lot, because I'm one of those people that over-rehearses stuff. But I was really intrigued by this whole idea. Also, like, how I feel about myself, but then sitting here in this line, I feel like I feel a disconnect. Like, I don't feel like I'm there yet. But that's encouraging. What's funny is it hit me last night. So we did Kane Park last night. And it hit me that 40 years ago, when I was 21 years old, I moved to Northeast Ohio in '84 to join Alice Rubenstein's Footpath Dance Company. And after that was over in the 90s, I spent my time as an artist in residence. Supposed to be 2 weeks, but then it was 11 years because I fell in love with the kids at Cleveland School of the Arts. And I think my big paradigm change was when I was, you know, the token white guy in the room and realizing, man, there's talent everywhere. I mean, when you're on tour, you're just like, you're a dancer and you're doing what you're told, and you're on tour, the big picture is just not a thing. And I got into this school and it was like, talent is everywhere and it's a ridiculous amount of talent. And why isn't access to developing that talent? And true disclosure, I grew up drawing and painting and doing music, and I was a gymnast and I was a kid. And I didn't start real dance training until I was 18. But by the time I was 21, I was hired by Alice Rubenstein. So that was rough. And then in the 90s, at Cleveland School of the Arts, it attracted the attention. I started an after-school program for boys called The Yard, Youth at Risk Dancing. That went ridiculously well. We ended up at the White House. That attracted Allison Chase, who formed Palablis. So that was very different than, you know, the Eric Hawkins thing, and then all the improvisational stuff that I learned from people like Robert Ellis Dunn, who was one of my teachers, and some other people. And at the end of 11 years, I kind of realized I can continue to make significant change in the lives of young people in this building, or I can create a group of dancers to look at this paradigm. And the paradigm shift for me, I learned from the kids that my experience, I think our generational experience, was we were used to further the dance agenda of the choreographer or the company, or it was kind of like being a player in the NFL but with no cash flow in comparison. And I kind of realized as I watched kids' lives change that instead of using people to further the dance world's agenda, I should probably use everything that I learned from. I spent a lot of time in studios with very famous people that I had no business being in the room with, but I knew it at the time, and I really absorbed everything they said, and just gave that to the kids, right? And we created work together and told their stories, you know, through the choreography. And I realized that I need to use dance to further people instead of using people to further dance. And that was just, for me, kind of like this huge switch in my head. And started Inlet, and right before 9/11, I saw that on there. I was like, yeah, that was when I started the company. That was rough. There's been a lot of rough. But I just, there's like all of these experiences along the way that keep me going. And I feel so blessed to be in Northeast Ohio, where I could kind of greenhouse myself as an artist. Because I walked into the dance world a maker, making sculptures and art and painting. And then I was like, I'm going to do that with bodies in space and just keep going. And because I'm in Northeast Ohio, I've been able to do that for 40 years for a living with like no side job stuff going on. That's rare, and it's a privilege, and it's an honor, and it's super humbling. So to me, it's like this accumulation of all of these, you know, being booked at Jacob's Pillow, which was on my bucket list. Like someday before I die, I want to go look at Jacob's Pillow because I know it's there.
Yeah.
And you know, Ted Sean's like hugely important to me as a dude in dance with the Men in Dance Company in the 30s. And but then we got booked there, got a standing ovation because that kind of freaked me out.
There's something that I'm also hearing that's reflected on the timeline on our far wall, and I hope people will spend time with that, is the sort of ebb and flow. I mean, all the choreographers in the room are familiar with like theme and variation and motifs, and so you're like, when do I need to spend some time away from Northeast Ohio? When do I need to come back?
Exactly.
When do I need to bring people in, and when do I tour and go out to the world? And it's, you know, this sort of agile way of development.
Yeah.
I'm curious, and in the interest of time, we might only be able to hear from 2 or 3 of you. What's the same as it was 20 years ago? And what's different? And I offer this because our second panel, we have a lot more people who are in their first 10 to 15 years. So curious, that idea of like, what was it like in the beginning, and is it still like that, and what has changed? Mary, you seem on the edge of your tongue. Tip of your tongue.
I think what is still the same is the process by keeping the company together, raising funds. You know, it's always thought it was going to get easier, but it hasn't. It's about the same. And in terms of what's different is, I think, mindset about an openness, about an acceptance of, you know, myriad of dance. And we are included in that. And I think, you know, before, when people heard disability, they could not connect dance and disability together. And today they understand not only what we're working towards, but what we have achieved worldwide, not just here.
Great. Yeah, Mia, what's the same, what's different?
And I don't mean any negativity to people sitting here, but I feel like as a whole, our community is not very well educated in great dance. We are, but not the people that we're trying to serve. And how, moving forward, it used to be, when my mom started, she brought Heinz Paul in. So she was the first ballet teacher, first teacher that made people, you know, wear leotard and tights. There was a great community of a bunch of ballet teachers that got together. They started the Dance Institute. They taught for free. And then my mom saw Heinz Paul in New York, asked him to come over, and had some funders like the Kate Firestone was one of them. And it built this great, like, you know, this greatness about dance. And I feel like because we've lost so many wonderful dance companies, our audience isn't really educated in great dance.
I mean, there's a couple of things that I'll also add to that because it's not on the timeline. We tried to hit the like worldwide major things, but we're also taking like technological advancements where, you know, like there's less of a curiosity for dance if people are like, but I can stay home and binge on something and not have to deal with parking.
Yeah, but it's not the same as seeing live before. It's
you don't have to convince us, but I think that's
you can't compare seeing someone like Angel Carrello or, you know, Tyler Peck live.
David wants to jump in, and then Maggie.
I mean, the revolution is the internet, and I think it's changed. It's changed everything. It's certainly in relation to the performing arts, live performing arts. And you know, when we started GroundWorks, there really wasn't an internet per se. It had been invented, but nobody was using it. And that I remember feeling that shift happening so quickly, and the way people. Now, the way artists connect, the way they create, it's a completely different mindset, I think. And the other factor is attention. as a result of the internet.
Yes.
And that word for me is so like it's just it has so many implications for us as artists. But I really do feel that, you know, generally the public's attention has really been affected, and that really affects the entire field. Whether, doesn't matter what kind of work you're doing, doesn't matter where you're presenting it or how you're trying to present it, it's changed.
Maggie, what did you want to say?
Well, I was going to say, having been a part of the birth of both Ohio Ballet and Cleveland Ballet and going through that phase in my career, that was a time of, it was a great renaissance of dance in this region. It was also a great renaissance of theater as well. And even though audiences didn't have the education, they were educated because of the greatness of those two companies. And what I feel now is I don't feel any cohesiveness. You know, we have so many independent artists here, we have the companies here, but I don't feel that cohesiveness as a profession, as an art form. It feels like it's all scattered. Everybody has their own audiences that they're bringing in. There isn't a great deal of crossover audience, and it just feels like until we can figure out how to tap that energy and that talent as a whole unit, it's almost like treading water. That's what it feels like to me. So.
Well, I also feel like artistic directors are pulled in many more directions than they ever have been. And just trying to do the day-to-day, it's pretty excruciing, you know?
It's awful.
Sorry.
Well,
okay.
Facts. Facts.
I mean, speaking the truth, Miss McIntyre, though, what would you like to say?
Well, I wasn't around during the footpath. I wasn't around during that period that you're talking about. I would see Ohio Ballet in New York. I said, wow, are they from Ohio? They're just using that name. They were on the stage at, you know, they were just every place. And so but the thing is, I don't know. So that was part of that period you're talking about. And also Caramel.
We're looking at the 80s.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But even in the 80s and even before, Caramel was also, Caramel, and Maggie knows this, Caramel also had very strong dance.
Yes.
So the audience was very educated about started back in the 30s all the way through the 80s. And so that it was true, the audiences saw all that very fine dance. The thing is, what I see though, maybe it's a little different. When I go to the concerts that Dance Cleveland brings in, the people just are going, the people in Cleveland, I feel they're hungry for culture.
Yes.
I feel that being like, I used to live here, now they're hungry for culture. So they're like, yes, they know who to bring, and the people coming, and you probably feel that yourself. Yeah, the people are hungry and they want to see it, even with the internet and the TikTok and the, you know, all of that. So the people come out. They come out in the rain, in the snow, So, so it's there, but it's for certain things. And I agree with what Maggie says too. I'm agreeing with both of you. The other thing is that because there's not a certain cohesiveness, there's not a crossover to audiences in terms of the different dance companies. If that could be some kind of a unified, then it would be much stronger. I don't see that in other cities. Even in New York City or Minneapolis, or the people are going to each other's concerts. Like the dance community itself is big enough to make big audiences for each other. So that's one thing I noticed right away when I returned to Cleveland. Somebody said, "Are you going to start your own company here?" I'm like, "No," because it was not this kind of unification. But I think it can happen, especially since it's being pronounced here.
Yeah. I mean, we're gonna move into the lightning round. They were forewarned. Maybe you didn't know there was a lightning round.
Sounds painful.
Yeah, but and let's understand more of the diversity and differences. And there's a similar set of questions, a lightning round for our panel later today too, because this is all collective living environmental analysis. And I'll share a New York story for perspective. When I first got to NCCAkron, we did a listening tour and would meet all over the country with different venues and say, put together a focus group of artists that we should know about and vice versa should know about what we're doing in Northeast Ohio. And at the Joyce, one of the questions, there were 8 different companies whose names will remain anonymous for now. And I asked, so what's your average budget size? And of those 8 companies, all of whom perform at the Joyce in New York, ranged from $2 million to $35,000.
Oh.
And that, does the audience know the difference?
Wow.
No. And so that's why I was very curious and appreciate in advance the candor to sort of reflect. I mean, we could all go looking for people's 990s. But I'm also really curious, and Maggie, I'm going to start with you. What's the earliest budget you recall, and what's the more recent budget for Ohio Contemporary Ballet?
Yeah, when I first started, the budget was about $150,000 a year. And now it's just under $700,000.
Okay, and that was 2003 to today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
20 years.
Mia.
Well, 1975, the budget was $5,000. And now, 49 years later, it's $200,000.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't even have the calculator to know what $5,000 in 1975 dollars is in 2024 dollars, but we'll follow up today. Bill, earliest budget you recall and the most recent budget?
There was no budget for years. I'm dead serious. It was projects, and we finally got enough projects together that it became a budget. And I think we're hovering around 450-ish right now.
Mary.
Well, 3,000 we started with, which was a donation from my husband and myself.
Right?
That's real, tell the truth.
Yeah.
And now it's about 550 to 600,000. And I always say, you know what, it's just a matter of zeros. Like, keep adding to it. Yeah.
David.
Well, sort of like Bill, for the first couple of years, we didn't really have a budget. It was really just project. But I think in about 2-3 years in, first budget was probably about 40,000. And then our most recent budget was about 730,000.
Great. And Miss McIntyre.
Okay, so when I started in 1971, the first budget was my salary. I was working at the Lincoln Center Dance Collection, so that was how I paid the dancers. And then for our first performance, and then not long after that, I got a grant, which was a fellowship, so it wasn't from organization, and that was $5,000. So I got to move forward. Then I started my 501c3. So maybe after a couple of years, it was maybe 35,000, or it could have been a bit more. And then we toured and it really started raising up. So right now, I don't have a permanent company. I don't have a permanent company, so I have projects we do, and I have special grants that come in, and sometimes I have an umbrella that holds those funds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next, we'll start with you again, Maggie, and go down the line. How many dancers do you have, and are they on contract or payroll?
We currently have 10 dancers and 1 intern, and everybody is on payroll. Everybody's an employee.
Well, mine are youth ballet, so I have 23 dancers and none are on the payroll.
There you go.
But of course, they get all the benefits of not only performing, but we have master classes and all that stuff, so, yeah.
Yeah.
I have a managing director, I have me, I have 3 company members and 3 apprentices, 2 apprentices coming in the fall. All of the dancers are part-time employees, and there's a bunch of contract people like lighting designers and all that kind of stuff.
Lots of different ways to make work.
Yes.
Mary,
10 dancers, and they're all on the payroll, so, yeah.
does that include yourself? Because you still perform.
Well, I am full-time, you know, within the company, but my job is, yeah, I still perform, yeah. But it's a mix of responsibility,
Yes.
obviously.
Yeah, we know there are also some years where choreographers don't pay themselves and artistic directors don't pay themselves. So
That would be every year.
Checks.
David, number of dancers, contract or payroll?
We made a commitment early on. We made a commitment early on to hire the dancers full-time. So as soon as we could, we decided that we would prioritize that. You know, I danced so many years going on unemployment, like at least a third of the year. And I thought, this is crazy, especially in Northeast Ohio, to ask dancers to go to the unemployment office to complete their yearly salary. So why don't we just decide what we can afford to pay them, and we'll pay that out over 52 weeks, and we will not require them to be unemployed. Even if we have breaks or there isn't enough work, we will still pay them, and we've just maintained that for 5 full-time employees.
Would you illuminate, if there anyone who maybe has not been on a company model, I know that there are still companies that practice this, like what does that mean if you're like, I'm a dancer with this company, but then there's a month out of the year that you have to go on unemployment?
Oh yeah, well even, you know, for established ballet companies, it was just the way they worked. You would sign a contract each year for a certain number of weeks, would vary between 30 to 40 something weeks, very rarely more than 45 weeks a year. And when you were not employed, you were on your own. So
Kind of a
that's
forced vacation hiatus, so that if you wanted income, you could go to the unemployment office?
you could, or you know,
Or
I
get
mean,
another gig.
You could get you know, project work if you could, especially around Nutcracker time. It's the time when I did a lot of guesting on my career that way too. But you know, it's really not an option in a community like Cleveland or Akron. There's not a lot of other like project work, or there
Right.
wasn't.
Or gigging the way musicians do, you know,
Right.
from the Canton and Akron Symphony in the Cleveland Orchestra, you know, yeah.
And we really wanted dancers. I mean, we were pooling from all over the country, so to bring them here to work, we really felt we needed to incentivize them to be here, and to really provide a sort of a modicum of security for them to stay here. So we did that.
Yeah. And Miss McIntyre, number of dancers most recently?
Okay, then I'll go back and tell you. what
Yeah.
happened. Okay, so I had 7 dancers, 4 musicians in my company. We had our own studio, which was on 125th and Lenox, which is where I had it renovated, and all that was from our touring. We had surplus from our touring that allowed us to have a beautiful space, and mostly it was for us to rehearse and have our classes, but sometimes people rented the space as well. The select people. And then, so during that time for the dancers, the musicians were part of the company. We traveled with all of them, 4 musicians, but we had come to a place where we were able to have the dancers by the early 80s for them to be on a payroll throughout the whole year. And the thing is that in the summer, usually we weren't touring, so they could have unemployment then. And it is a city also where you can do all kinds of things in New York. You could have, you can be in New York, you could be what you call a temp, or you have all kinds of work as an actor, or dancer. Like, oh, I'm gonna be here, but I go on the road for 2 months. They're like, okay. There are a lot of people who work like that in New York City. It's not like that too many other places. But they could have unemployment, or they taught, they were able to teach all different, but through most of the year, for quite a few years, they were on payroll. And that was like, came up in an era that I wanted to be the model dance company. That's how dance companies were then. Like I see Paul Taylor, Martha Graham, da-da-da-da. I'm like, well, that's what they do. I want to do that too. So somehow, because that was in my mind, I developed that model. And then it actually worked out, except when it got too much for me. All it was doing everything to make that happen. Keep the studio going, keep the da-da-da-da-da-da. I'm like, I had the studio so I could get in the studio and create and just relax. But it was like, so I said, oh, let me just pause. So that's what I had to shift. I had to make a shift.
Yeah.
And the people who were the funding people, the National Endowment for the Arts, New York State Council of the Arts, they were all congratulated me for daring to shift like that, because they knew a lot of people were going through those things, but they just would keep on going. So now the people over years, those same dancers stayed with me doing independent projects, and now the younger people I'm with, they're 5 dancers and 4 musicians. We work for the different projects that we've been doing, and we also, each performance we do, which we started last fall, we've done several, and then next in Boston, and I bring 4 guest dancers in each community so that they come in. We pay them too, or the venue pays them. So it has to do with how much our production costs. So the presenter has to have that amount of money. Either we're there for 2 performances or for a whole week. We do performances, we do lectures, we do classes and all like that. And then we bring these other people into our company, and they're either students or they're local dancers. So that's been a lot of fun. So that's my motto right now.
It's so fascinating, the ebb and flow. I mean, more transitions, letting go of how we think we're supposed to do things, and I also appreciate, just to foreshadow a little bit of what I know for the afternoon, late afternoon panel, is we have fewer companies and more independent projects. And so it's also fascinating to me that on the timeline, Miss McIntyre being the first among this panel, making your choreographic debut in 1971, would go through that whole cycle of having a company and then coming back around to working on a project basis. So I just wanted to sort of put a flag in that for us. I'm going to ask our last question before we break for lunch, and so this is a combination of the two. We'll go down the line, and I'm curious, is this what you thought you were embarking upon when you started out? And or what is your definition of success? Of satisfaction? I had a great artist, Amara Tabor-Smith, who was like, can we not use success? Can we just talk about artistic satisfaction? The kind of why and what we're seeking for. So I offer to share that with you as well. Are you ready, Maggie?
I'll try.
Okay.
What was the question again?
Is this what you thought you were embarking upon, and what's your definition of success?
Okay. I never had a plan. All I ever wanted to do was be a dancer. And I was able and fortunate to have that career. And when I was done with that career, the first thing I did was I thought, well, I don't know what to do. Maybe I'll be a scuba diver. So I went and I took scuba diving lessons, and I went through the advanced coursework, And then I had a diving accident, and I got the bends, and then I said, well, maybe this isn't the career for me. Then I decided, well, maybe I want to fly a plane. So I went and I took lessons at Brookfront Airport, and I learned how to fly a plane. And then I realized if anything ever went wrong up in the air, I was not the right person to have to handle that. And then I decided, well, maybe I need to make money. Maybe I'll become a stockbroker. So I went and I studied that, and I took my tests, and I became a licensed stockbroker. That lasted less than a week. So then I said, well, maybe now that I've retired, I'll go to college. I'll go back to college and get a degree. So I got a degree in exercise physiology, thinking I was going to go work at the Cleveland Clinic. And as I was finishing the degree, the Cleveland Clinic said, well, you really have to have a doctorate if you want to come work for us. And right about that time that the University of Akron was going through a change, and I was invited to take the position as director of the Department of Dance at the University of Akron. So that's how I made my transition out of dance, was to go back into dance.
Yep.
And I thought academia was where I was going to stay. I ended up getting a job in Hong Kong. I was a dean in a university there for 7 years. And then I came back just as all the mess was starting with the two companies struggling, and within a less than a year, everything fell apart.
Early 2000s.
Yes, thank you. And then I still didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up, and so I got a job as a ballet mistress with Ballet Trocadero de Monte Carlo. I did that for 2.5 years. And then the repertory project, Susan Miller stepped down, and I was invited to rehearse the company for the rest of the season while they looked for a new head. And then that company has transformed twice now, becoming Verb Ballets and now Ohio Contemporary Ballet. And so to round out your question, I think that we struggled with our company for many, many, many years to establish an identity, and that was, the challenge was the environment. What does the environment, what is sustainable in the environment that we have? And in looking around at what all of you were doing, we didn't want to be repetitive. And, you know, so now that we have done the full transition to a contemporary ballet company, I feel very strongly that that is really where we belong. That is where we are really able to distinguish ourselves and make a difference in the community.
Wonderful. Miss Mia,
Oh,
definition of success? What you always thought it was going to be cracked up to be?
Oh, no, of course not. When I first started, I thought, gosh, this is great. It's the greatest job in the world, which it is. But every year I feel like I'm learning something more. And, oh, I should have been doing this, and I should. So it never ends. Even as a ballet teacher, I learn, and I love that. What was the other question?
Your definition of success.
Definition of success. Seeing my students become beautiful people. You know, not just necessarily becoming ballet dancers, although I love it when they go on to professional careers, but just seeing the discipline, the hard work, the learning disappointment and all that, taking that through to whatever they do in their life. And I have to say, you know, when we had our 40th reunion back 9 years ago, my sister Lori from New York City walked in and she goes, oh my God, look at all these little doctors and judges and, you know, lawyers and CEOs and CFOs. And she goes, this is the legacy of Ballet Excel Ohio. And she was so right. These are so highly accomplished. So that's my definition of success.
Dancers can do anything.
Of course.
We're not biased at all. Yeah.
No bias.
No?
First answer, heck no. No, I walked into creating Inlet knowing that I didn't know what I was doing. I still feel like that, a little bit. I'm knowing more and more it's this accumulated learning that's like, I never knew I had to learn how to do this, but here we go. But just like in technique classes where you're pushing yourself, because like that petit allegro feels too damn fast or whatever it is, but then you kind of like wrap your head around I can learn anything. What do I need to do to me in order to get there? You know what I mean? And I think that all of the ridiculous number of hats that we all wear, just kind of going, okay, now this one, you know? And I think for me, success is adjusting upward. Myself, I'm big on craft, the craft of dance making. That's like a thing with me. The craft of technique, the craft of dance making, the craft of bringing an audience to their feet, because that's different. And pushing me in that way, but also encouraging my dancers that way, and then the students that way. When I see people, I had an older man come up to me last night and said, you know, life has been really, really rough, and I walked into this concert feeling really, really empty, and I'm leaving really, really full. There it is.
Nice. Mary?
Well, I not in a million years thought that I would have this company and have it for so long. But because my dream was just to dance, to follow in my mother's footsteps and to dance. But it really grew out of other people's desires and requests. So, you know, like for instance, we didn't have a summer intensive at first, but a woman contacted us. I was actually in the studios of Cleveland Ballet. We shared those studios. And she said, I have a daughter and she'd love to train under you. Could you spend a week with her? And they were from Texas, and they brought her in, and we spent an entire week training her. So that gave us the idea that, you know, we could build upon that, and that not only did I want to dance, but there were a lot of people with disabilities and those without that wanted to dance together. So that it just grew and grew. And I'm one of those that can't say no. You can't say no to. So I have built it around that. And for me, success, I think, is it can mean many things. It can be many things. But for me, just to take a kernel of an idea or a dream and bring it to fruition in the way that it was envisioned, you know, just gives you that kind of aha moment where you feel the success of it. And along those ways, it could ebb and flow, it could change somewhat, it could be more difficult than you ever thought it would be. But a lot of times it's that driving force to keep your eye on the target, to know that that's where you want to go with it.
Yeah. David?
I agree with everything people are saying, and I gave a talk a while ago, and I titled it "The Art of Not Knowing," because to me, like at every stage of my my career, both as a performer and then trying to start an organization and choreography and the whole process of creating and making was always sort of not knowing. Really looking back, realizing how much I didn't know, and then, you know, being able to sort of understand that that was actually the best, in some ways, the best place to start anyway. Because I probably wouldn't have started if I had known too much.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
I think that's a dance right now. Yeah.
Man.
Really. So really looking at that,
That's so true.
you know, the company started just with a really simple idea. We're going to dedicate ourselves to exploring new work. And we didn't know what that would mean or where it would take us. And I think I'm very proud of the fact that for 25 years we've really towed that line and really kept evolving as a result and become a kind of oasis for creativity, I think. And so, you know, that I feel very much is part of my sense of like think we succeeded. But for me personally, I think over the years, just learning how to facilitate others, to allow or create the circumstances or frame the situation in a way that others can do their best work,
Right.
and to become their best selves in a sense through that, and so that became my definition for success.
Nice.
Ms.
Not that I always
McIntyre?
am successful, but
It's a moving target.
yeah.
It certainly is.
Last word, Ms. McIntyre, your definition of success or satisfaction.
Oh, then you want me to answer the other one?
Dealer's choice.
Okay, yeah, so yes, I was a little different from everybody, because I started choreographing when I was 7. I loved dancing, and I always loved choreographing. I mean, I had productions when I was 7. So once I was interviewed, I taught for a while at University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and I read back in something I said, oh, one day I'll have a dance, I'll move to the Midwest and have my a dance company there. So I always wanted to have a dance company. That I was just in maybe 23 when I was interviewed. So when I went to New York to study, actually I went to study with different people so I could get very strong, but I didn't want to just, okay, so I want to get very strong technically and with different ways of moving and all like that. At the same time, I got very connected with musicians, avant-garde jazz, advanced new music. I've got to talk to you about, because, did you know Judith Dunn? No, I'm asking. Yeah, we have to talk.
Yeah, we do. It doesn't in Milwaukee sameness.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right,
By the
so anyway, so I got so connected with these musicians because I loved the music and had some background in the dance music connection with that type of music. So I started experimenting with them, and I actually started a concert in New York with these musicians. And the musicians were not in Cleveland. They were some of them were from Cleveland, but they were in New York. Okay, so even though there's a brilliant, so that's how I end up staying in New York. It had to do with the dance music connection. Then I had the instincts, because I always wanted to have my own company from when I was a little girl. I had the instincts to know who to talk to. So I went to the head of the Association of Modern Dance Companies. I said, how do I really establish a company? Say, you do this, get a 501c3, here's a lawyer you can go to, that. Then I asked this person, how do I get a grant? I just had, because I had that focus, I guess, maybe my whole life. And then it just built from there. So I didn't have, and I still love dancing, I still do, and I danced with the company. So that, I wasn't surprised. What was a surprise was like, whoa, this is hard. It was like, wow, this is like, oh, you don't know what it's going to, I have said that. Would I have started all of this like this? If I had known it was going to be this, the headaches and the da-da-da-da-da. Sometimes the headaches are the people in the company. No matter how great a dancer they are. You know what I mean? Okay. So anyway, so then I haven't thought too much about the idea of success. The last year or 2 years, I've been thinking about the network of the dance world, the powers that be and the gatekeepers. Okay, that's a whole thing that I can talk about. However, but then I was at American Dance Festival just for a month and a few days. I worked with students. I got to choreograph on these students. We had a wonderful time. But while I was there were people, we'd see performances in the evening and just walking through the campus and all. People like, oh, Ms. McIntyre, I had you in a class back in 2003. I had you in 1975. I just remember, I love your work. It was like, and 2 months ago I saw you that this was like telling me about myself. All these people, almost every day, somebody who came out who knew me, who had studied with me. I'm like, oh my goodness, all this was just blowing my mind. And then somehow that is some kind of success. I'm like, wow, I think I'm struggling and doing this, and all these people are saying, oh, and now I do this because I studied with you, and da-da-da-da-da, and I saw your work, and da-da-da. And then the other thing was when the curtain came down after the performance with the students, they worked so hard. They did a beautiful, and I had to use recorded music, but it was really beautiful music. When the curtain came down, the tears were just rolling down there, just down their cheeks, because they realized what had happened. So that transformation inside of the people, this must be, so the success, I guess, in me is not what I've done with the artistic on the stage, or it is that, but it's like what it has done touching the people who perform it, and also the people who've experienced it in class or in perform. One musician, we were at a talk back, he said, I'll tell you this, Dianne will say, oh yes, very nice, but you know, you needed to do this instead. He said, but I will go, no matter what, I'll go around to the world to work with her. So those, now you ask that question, you've helped me answer it. I didn't know before what I felt success was.
I love that. A big round of applause for our first panel.